This is Paul Johnson from Film Obsessive. Today I am with Brooke Sebold. Brooke is director and writer of a new short film. It's called Grandma Bruce. Grandma Bruce? Okay, Brooke, let me leave it to you to explain the title, Grandma Bruce, and tell us a little bit about your short film.
Well, I'll say that Grandma Bruce is a bit of a love letter to my grandma, who I was very close to. She passed away in 2001, and I had been driving her hand-me-down Lexus sedan for about a decade. And the film is really about kind of saying goodbye to my grandma and also the car that we once shared. It's a magical short comedy, and so the car comes to life with the spirit of my grandma from the ever after, who is a bit of a backseat driver and has judgmental opinions about the character's life and also their driving. So it's a comedy. And yeah, I mean, it really was just like a tribute to, my grandma and I had a really special relationship. And also, the generational divide is such, and also just sort of cultural stories and expectations around what one's life is supposed to look like. And so the film is sort of in a very loving way, challenging back and, kind of claiming one's own choices and releasing oneself from those cultural expectations in a funny, charming way, hopefully.
That is lovely, and it is funny, and it is charming, and we do get to laugh a lot along the way. What would you tell me about your grandma that you really wanted to convey in this film?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is just how much love we both have for each other. And then also, I think, I don't know if it's an epigenetic Jewish cultural thing to use humor and especially complain through humor. And so I think it's just that like push and pull of, the love that we have for each other and also this very specific, I guess, cultural language of judgmental worry, which I feel like was a big part of my grandmother's love language to me and also to like all of her grandkids and family. It was just like, in some ways, how she shows love. So in a loving way, it's sort of looking at that and also just like wanting to celebrate that because I continue to feel like that's very familiar and it comes from a loving place and also to kind of recognize some of the I guess, programming behind those suggestions of, how your life is supposed to look like.
Right. And you're carving out a different life for yourself as a filmmaker, I think, than maybe your grandmother would have expected or wanted. And the film is really about, I think, your character. She's a stand-in for you, right? Is it fair to say that? Kind
Yes.
of making her own choices and, finding the courage to stand up for those choices and express them even if they're not exactly what grandma would have thought for herself.
Yeah. She was supportive in her own ways and she, understood my life as well as she could, but it was fun in making this film to kind of be able to articulate things that I didn't know about myself to articulate to her at the time. At the time, I was not, I don't even think the word non-binary existed when my grandmother passed away. So there are things that I've learned about myself since she's been gone, and it was kind of fun to make this film and to be able to articulate like some of those nuances. And then, I mean, it really is, I'm not an actor at all. And still, when I first wrote this, it was like in the beginning of the pandemic. And I had, it was supposed to be a very small scale thing, which it is. It's very small scale, made on a shoestring budget. But I had originally thought I would just be in it. I thought it would just be sort of like a fun exercise in doing something bold and new. And then the further I got along in the process, I was like, I'm writing, I'm directing, driving and acting. It's too much. It's too much. So then I, started casting and immediately found the actor who plays Brooke, Laura Chirinos, and she's just so wonderful. And she had a lot of similarities in her own life that I think she really connected to the story. But then also, now I know Laura after having shot the film, and she's, she brings so much of herself to it. She's also so different from the character she plays. And so it was really interesting for me to just sort of see her kind of make it her own with her own personal history and also brings so much of me. And, she sort of watched me and took from that to, and brought that into the character. So it was like so fun to see and also much more fun to edit and be out in the world with it when it's not my face and I'm not,
I
you know,
hear that.
worried about
And
that element of it. It's like an added, yeah, obstacle,
It's so cool, and I did want to ask you a little bit about that timeline. So this is a film that you did start a little bit like pre-COVID or during COVID, and then were you in production during COVID?
Yeah, I started writing it probably about like 6 or 7 months into the COVID experience. And then
Mhm.
we probably shot it maybe like 9 or 10 months later, and then, let it sit for a bit, came back to it. It's sort of been this like loving passion project. And then finally sort of did a little reshooting and finished it up last year.
Gotcha. And I agree, Laura Chirinos is really excellent in the film. I have no indication of what your acting abilities might be or might not be, but
Me
I
either.
respect that the choice really worked out. And I have talked to directors who have acted in their films and have said it is more difficult sometimes than they anticipated, and it's a nice thing to be able to get off their plate, even in a small production like yours. But I also have to give a compliment to Monica Piper, who is so excellent as as the grandma character here, and it seems to me also even facially slightly to resemble Laura Chirinos. I mean, at least to the extent that they seem very plausibly like they could be from the same gene pool.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And Monica is so great. We got connected to someone who was connected to the Braid Theater, which used to be known as the Jewish National Theater, I believe. I might be wrong about that, but it is, we got connected to a handful of different potential actors to play the role of Grandma. And Monica was just, I mean, she's so funny. We aged her up many years. She is not as
Mhm.
old as the Grandma character. But she also, she was a writer for the original Roseanne series, and she was the head writer for Rugrats. And so she's just like, she's a writer herself. She's a comedian. And the most fun part of the entire process for me was once I had the script and I had it cast, and then I had them here in my living room, and we were just like playing and ad-libbing and adding lines and punching it up. And it was just like, it was so fun. Yeah. And so just like having that sort of creative energy, and both of those actors also are just like incredibly supportive and real collaborators, so it was wonderful to
Mhm.
make a film with that kind of energy.
And she is funny, and the film is funny too. And I think a lot of times that people can be funny, but that doesn't necessarily mean a film is going to be funny. The really nice work I think on the timing of the film, a lot of that comes out of the editing and just simply managing the reaction shots. What you're doing in the car is something different from what viewers experience when they see it on the screen months later. So I have to give your editor a compliment there.
Yeah.
And your feedback for the editor, I'm sure, in trying to manage the comic timing of the piece as well.
That's always the hardest thing in a piece like this is like, the script is very, sorry, the film is very true to the script, but we definitely cut out a bunch of lines here and there to sort of punch it up. And, I also edit. And I edited this with my friend Steph Kesnocha, who's a wonderful editor. But, so much of it is really just like finding, just taking off like 6 frames here, and all of a sudden the joke lands. And so it really is, takes a while to get it there, and like lots of feedback from lots of different people, which, as an editor myself, that is such a fun part of the process, because it's really like you get to see just the magic of the minutia and changing or moving a sound effect or something, and it really sort of like changes the texture and nature of a scene.
But you are like, are you a documentary filmmaker? Is that what you consider yourself primarily? And this is, a different kind of work than you usually do, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to even say what I usually do because I kind of do. I came into film, I undergrad I studied film. I went to Brown where it was like experimental film and theory, and I fell in love with that. And I would like, shoot Super 8 film and hand process it, and tape like dirt and dust onto like film and project it, and it was great and I loved it. And then I moved to San Francisco and I discovered documentary. And that's when I co-directed my first documentary feature, and that was like a 4-year process, and really fell in love with documentary film. And in San Francisco, it was like a little bit of like the Hollywood of documentary. It's what everyone was doing, and so I got very immersed in it. And then passion had always been narrative film. And so I went back to film school and studied writing and directing and graduated and came out here. That was like 10 years ago or something. And so, really, I mean, I love narrative so much. I don't have an opportunity to do it so frequently because it's extremely expensive. With documentary, there is something really wonderful about like the agency of being able to kind of pick up a camera and start shooting and start making. And so I think just generally, I have made more documentary work. I also edit. I edit a ton of, documentary work and features and for TV and stuff. And so in some ways, my life is weighted more heavily to doc, but it's not really true. It's like so much of the narrative scripted work is invisible in the sense of like pitching a series or trying to get funding for a feature that falls through or whatever it is. And so it's sort of like they're really both neck and neck. I love them both and they're so different. It's like I really appreciate the ability of just sort of like feeling what a story is and what would serve it. And it's like, oh, is that a documentary or is that something that, could be different in a scripted form or where you can manipulate the elements of the story in a different way. And, each has different strengths and, it's just different process. So I love them both a lot.
Yeah, I hear that. And there are so many
Fortunately,
fascinating ways, these days that they can intersect or converge or inform each other without necessarily being or feeling scripted. I mean, without necessarily feeling separate from each other as well.
absolutely. That,
You
in
know,
terms of my editing work, I actually have done a couple of features that are sort of in a hybrid space of like either like elevated reenactments or, whatever it might be, but it's really sort of a fusion of doc and narrative. And those are honestly my favorite projects because they're also experimental. So it's like it hits all the bases. So yeah.
Nice, that's exciting. I was going to mention the last interview I did with Laura Plancart, who just directed Mexican Dreams, is very much in that same vein. It's a, documentary about a Mexican woman in kind of a midlife crisis. She, set up cameras during COVID, mailed her an iPhone, said film yourself. Got to the end of that process, and the two of them decided together, well, let's just cast that footage aside and just script this and do the whole film as a reenactment. And it was marvelous, just, fascinating. But I mean, there's so many different ways that filmmakers can work without feeling constrained and bound by, what the labels are, I guess. It's just the
Absolutely.
challenge for all of them is then making their work clear as they're submitting it to festivals, trying to get it licensed, trying to get it out in the world because that world tends to depend more on labels, I think.
Hmm. Yeah.
I just speaking of which, I just wanted to ask you about your plans for Grandma Bruce and where it's been in festivals so far and what you have lined up for it next.
Yeah, I mean, it's played at a bunch of festivals. We premiered at the San Jose Short Film Festival, which was wonderful, and then it played at a festival in San Francisco, one here in LA, and we're submitting it, and it's playing, in a handful of different queer festivals. It played in the Boston Wicked Film Queer Film Festival, and hopefully it will continue to live a long life of festivals. We'll see. And ideally, I'm looking now to, figure out a platform where I can distribute it so that it can be seen a little bit more widely. Yeah, and then my intention is just to keep writing and keep making work. I just wrote another short a couple weeks ago. So I was gonna say is like, in some ways, I love film so much. I love doc, I love narrative and scripted. In some ways, it's hard because it's so hard to get all of the pieces together to keep making. So I wish I loved it a little bit less sometimes, and yet I can't help myself because I want to keep making.
And you have a series that you're working on too called I Changed My Mind. Where's
Yes,
that?
yes. We're actually releasing the pilot episode in June, a little bit, yeah, about a month from now for Pride Week. For Pride Month. The series is called I Changed My Mind, and it's an interview series. Each episode is with a guest who has changed their mind about something significant in their lives that led to a paradigm shift. And the concept of the show is to sort of normalize what changing your mind looks like because we live in such a crazy polarized time that it's helpful for us to remember that we can have a flexibility mindset and change our minds about things. And so the first episode is with a woman named Jana, who is formerly transphobic mom who changed her mind and chose to love and accept her trans teenage son after he attempted suicide. So that's the first episode, and we shot 3 episodes. It was funded by a grant through UC Berkeley Greater Good Science Center, and we're gonna, be releasing those throughout the year, and then hopefully, continue to get funding and continue to make more episodes. It's a project that's like really special. The 3 episodes that we've made so far, I'm thrilled about, really excited to share, and I just hope we get to make more.
Good on you, Brooke. That sounds fantastic. Do you know
Right.
where we will be able to see those?
Yeah, my collaborator on that project is a production company called Second Peninsula, and the series that I've been working on with them, I edit for them for about 4 years now, is a series called Brief but Spectacular, which is a little profile series, also an interview show where each episode is with a guest who, it's basically spectacular people in the world doing spectacular things. And it airs every week on PBS NewsHour, and it's like solutions journalism, like focusing on the people who are trying to make a difference in the world. So we're going to be releasing it on our YouTube Brief but Spectacular channel. And then we're going to be collaborating with PFLAG and, just pushing it out on social media platforms, and hopefully the people who need to see it will have an opportunity to see it, because Janice specifically, her story is just so special.
It it sounds touching. I'm sure it will be. I look forward to watching it myself. I'll include a link in the interview itself and encourage our viewers and readers to take a look for it. And I'll just say thank you so much for joining us to talk about Grandma Bruce and I Changed My Mind and all of your other great work, Brooke. Thank you.
So much. This was really a pleasure. I really appreciate it.